Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Corsair Hydro GTX 1080 Ti. Ti, not Ti. 1080 Ti. Anyway, so in case you don't know what all the Hydro mumbo jumbo waffle is all about, Corsair have basically strapped one of their AIO liquid cooling, enclosed water cooling pump unit thingy me bobbers to an MSI 1080 Ti. That's it. Does it drop temps? Does it increase performance? Is it noisy? Is it quiet? Time to find out. Click, click! Now I'm obviously the king of not overproducing my stuff, but to be honest with you, the box doesn't have a great deal in it. That's the outer skin, this is the inner skin. There's pretty much just a lot of polystyrene and layers in there for you to be able to keep everything safe, and then all you get is some extra screws. These are the small screws so that you can screw the radiator into the front of your case, not through the fan. The other screws are actually already on and fitted. You get some manuals and stuff, and then a few case screws in case you actually do want to screw the fan in a different way, which is kind of backwards. This doesn't really make a lot of sense. Anyway, so not a great deal going on with the box. It's fairly big. It's also kind of weird for a for a graphics card box that it's square, because we're so used to seeing rectangle ones. But the actual card itself, this is what you get. You have the 1080 Ti here. This is a plastic cover. There's no metal there or anything like that. And it does feel kind of dashboardy, plasticky as well. You get the two hoses coming out of the side, but these hoses are nicely braided. They're all nice and soft. And something else is these twist, or can twist on the inside as well. So it doesn't matter which way round that you end up putting your radiator. There is some movement at this end. Now you can see that I'm holding on to this and I'm dragging it around, and it moves and it won't snap off, or at least it hasn't. And then you do get a nice back plate on the back where you've got a fair bit of MSI branding. The only other place you see there, you've got the MSI on the side and you've got the MSI little logo on the fan. You get the Corsair bit there, and you can see behind the smoked window there's another Corsair logo there. Radiator is just a 27.5mm thick, or as I call them, 30mm thick 120mm radiator, and it does come with one of the Corsair's ML, although I always say maglev and they hate me for it and they moan every time I say it's a maglev fan, because it's a maglev fan. Anyway, it's one of the ML 120 fans that are on there. White LED, which I personally think is amazing. But obviously if white's not going to be your thing, you may not want to rethink the your colour scheme or ordering a different fan. It's PWM as well, but there's nowhere on the actual card for you to put the PWM from your radiator, so this is going to have to go into your motherboard and be controlled that way, and we will talk about that in a moment. Now, if you're a bit silly like me, there are 6 screws around the outside, 3 on this side and 3 on this side, and if you pull those off you can remove the plastic lid. Now, there is a fan light connector on this side. I'm just trying to pull off. Aha! Which then releases it all together. And what we can see is you have a smoked window and then pretty much the MSI light down the side here. But that then exposes a fairly standard 1080 Ti underneath. Notice I said Ti again. I'm getting used to saying that. That's bad. But most important thing is we have the mount here for the AIO, which is held on with 4 screws. And removing those 4 screws basically exposes the back of our cold plate, or the cold plate as it would be. We can see that the pump comes off to this section over here where there's some wrapped cables and the light to get it all in and working. They're over here. But then essentially underneath we've got a Founders Edition 1080 Ti. I do believe it's not looking particularly different from anything that I've noticed in the past. Do you know what? So after removing a lot more screws, the back plate comes off. I've had to take off screws underneath as well, also ones at the end and some in the back of the card. But from that point, what we can do is expose the bare PCB itself. So it is just, it's normal width, so there's nothing particularly fancy about it there. You've only got a 6 and an 8-pin power up there. When you look at the design of the cooling plate, I suppose we can call it, it's not Founders Edition, but it is very, very similar. And it's just a tidy looking PCB. Really nothing major to write home about at all, other than the fact that it's been a long time since I've seen yellow thermal pads. But anyway, so 1080 Ti PCB there, and then we've basically got some fairly standard cooling plates, but then a mount for an AIO to give us the water cooling. And to be honest with you, we only really need the water on the main core itself anyway, because this is where the bulk of the heat is created. And before you ask, this fan does pretty much spin all the time, but only at a very low RPM. It's doing about 900 to 1150 RPM most of the time. We'll talk about this, but it is ridic quiet. It is strange that unlike the Founders Edition, it doesn't turn off at low load, but maybe that's just to make sure that there is always a constant bit of airflow over the cooling components. It is also kind of strange when you think about it that these cooling fins, this heatsink, is pretty much here just to give us something pretty to look at the back of the card, because it's not actually attached to anything in particular at all, other than giving more surface area to the heatsink itself. But I'm not sure whether it actually needs to be there. I'm pretty sure that's going to be more of a aesthetic add-on than anything, you know, specifically noteworthy in performance. Now, to be clear, I did get some flack the other day when I said to someone in one of the video YouTube comments that I don't do builds anymore. But when I say builds, I mean I don't do a flashy one-off build to do a single review. I do too many reviews to be able to get away with doing that. I just haven't got time. I do use the same case and the same setup and the exact same hardware pretty much in every single review. This one, we may have changed the memory, but the memory timings and the memory speeds hadn't changed. And we tried to keep it all so that it's all directly comparable. And we do a big change every now and then, sort of like every few years really, so that our graphs get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now some of the graphs are small, but they're because they are new tests. And if the graphs don't look that big, but there's quite a few tests in there, that's normally because we're not actually showing you all the results because they just don't fit on the page of the website. So, Corsair 760T, which I've got some funky vinyl decals around the outside. Then we've got an RMI 1000, which is a lot for this because this entire rig won't be pulling 500 watts from the wall. But it does mean that when I do things like SLI and stuff, I don't have to change the power supply. Then we've got a Force LX for the operating system, which is 512, and then we've got two Force LS, which are in RAID 0, and that is our game drive. And then underneath that, we've got 6900K. It's all, do you know what I mean? It's a decent, very decent gaming rig. But we have this in here now, and I'm here to talk to you about the radiator itself. Because obviously you've got the radiator, and I said to you about you can use the smaller screws to screw in from the back. Now that would be, for argument's sake, if you were mounting it in the roof, if you didn't have anything else in there, because this fan is blowing up through that way. Or you could have it in the back if you had room, although with my hoses I would have to turn my AIO in the roof around to be able to let me to do that. But what I did is I had mine when I was doing my testing in the front, because of the way that the case is configured, it was easier for me to do it that way, and I had the fan blowing the other way. But what I did notice is things were getting rather, not toasty, but I did a range of testing. So what that did mean is I did different fan speeds with this, because the fan, you just get the cable, and I was running it off the motherboard. Now one thing that you are going to need to keep in mind when you're using this and running this is it's going to take a little bit of hands-on to get the fan set up, because connecting a fan into the motherboard, motherboards are just designed for you to be able to cool the CPU, and pretty much everything is linked to the CPU. With some boards you can set it to things like MOSFET temperatures or a chipset temperature or even a motherboard temperature, but it's only just recently that some manufacturers have been allowing you to link your case fan speeds to a GPU temp. Why it's taken this long, I don't know. Now, I've got the X99 Strix. That doesn't allow me to link to the GPU temp. Some of the newer Asus, for argument's sake, Z270 boards do, and I'm hoping that a lot of the manufacturers are going to move that way in the future. So what that has meant is, by running this, I either needed to link it to the CPU temp. Now, when you do that, you can still, for a specific fan header, go into your specific software or go into the BIOS if you don't like installing software on your system. The fan header I used was CHA, so chassis fan 1, and I knew that was the graphics card. Now, what you can do is work out the sort of temperatures that your CPU gets to in your favourite game, for argument's sake, and then you can lower the fan threshold around that. So what I would say is, for argument's sake, if your CPU is getting to, let's say, 60 degrees and your case fans are then running at around 60–70%, with this, I would probably say that you want to lower the threshold down a little bit more. So it might be spinning a little bit faster than your CPU, than what you would normally be linking to your CPU temp. So if, for argument's sake, your case fans are at 60%, maybe be putting this into 75% or something. Now, the HD ML120 will do a massive RPM range. It's below 500 RPM. I think it's 450 RPM to something like 2,500 RPM, 2,550 RPM, something like that. And I have tested a range of fan speeds, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. But what I would do is you're going to need to almost become a reviewer. You're going to need to set your fan speeds up, go play your games for a bit, and if you can get one of those head-up displays or that come up onto your games, a lot of motherboard manufacturers again are doing them. You can do it with Afterburner. There are a lot of things like that, and it will show you your GPU temperature. So keep an eye on that, and if it looks like it's getting a little bit warm, you can go in and change your fan profile a little bit. That's going to be your best way to do it if you haven't got one of these magical, mystical motherboards that allows you to link it all in together. Now, something else that I did notice is, yes, this is a small radiator, and a lot of people will say it's not big enough. Now, it is big enough because it can cool it, but you do need to go careful with the fan RPMs when you do it, because I tested a range for you so that you would know. Now, I'm lucky enough to have air conditioning in the office and where I do my testing, and that means I can set the room up to be a static 20 degrees Celsius, which means when we do these kind of tests, they are pretty, kind of comparable with all of the other reviews that we've ever done. So I set the room to 20 degrees, and then what I did is I did a 500 RPM run, 1,000, 1,200, and then 2,500. So when we did that then give us a good range on the actual temperatures for the unit itself. So what we did to achieve our temperatures is the same thing that we do for all of the reviews that we do for GPU reviews, and that is we put Unigine on, we put it on to 4K resolution, we turn the anti-aliasing up to 8 times, and then we hit run, and we walk away for an hour and come back an hour later. After that hour, we literally go back into the OS and take a screenshot. On the desktop, then I will have a normal GPU-Z window, a GPU-Z window where I've hit sensors and I've gone down for the fan speeds, fan RPM, GPU core boost, memory timings, all of those things we go down, we put on max, then I open a third one, and just for the GPU core, I will put average. And then that gives us all of the results that we want. We've also got hardware monitor open, keeping an eye on the other temperatures. So there's a lot of data that I can extrapolate from a single run, but we've obviously done a lot of runs. Now, just for the temperature testing alone, it took 4 hours to test this. That would have been if we were running literally a test and then a test and a test. But I have to let the poor things cool down again afterwards. So you're probably looking at like 5-6 hours alone I spent on GPU testing. Anyway, with the graph up, 500 RPM fan, absolutely silent. But as you can see, 79 degrees at the bottom. Now that is safe for NVIDIA. That is it's an okay temp. One of the things I will say is the radiator, you could hardly touch it. And you could literally feel which one was the hot outlet on the hose, because there was a distinct temperature difference between the two hoses. It had got to the point where I was really not happy, if I'm fair. I will also say for this 500 RPM run, this is the only one I didn't get to running for an hour, because after about 10 minutes it was just like, no, it's just too low. So I cut the test run short. You can keep that in mind a bit later as well. So with 500 RPM, I wasn't happy at the end of the day. So you can go down that low. I just wouldn't necessarily advise that being a decent option or an option. And if you were to be doing this for argument's sake in the summer without air conditioning and stuff, that RPM and those sort of temperatures, we weren't far away off from all the boosts and stuff starting to come down. Once I saw us getting up near the 80 degrees mark on water, I just wasn't happy. Then turning it up to 1000 RPM, you could literally feel that the hot air coming out of the radiator, and you can see that the temperature's dropped to 61 degrees. Now, one of the things I will say is, and this is another reason why I've got this little thermometer here, is what I did do with the 500 RPM run. I actually rigged it up outside, put the thermometer in front like that, and then I took a test. Very raw, not scientific, but my poor little thermometer, bearing in mind, in an air-conditioned room at 20 degrees, I had 45 degrees registering on this thermometer that was coming out of the radiator. And it was, like I said, the radiator was hot to the touch. So I wouldn't be surprised if the fluid inside wasn't far off what the flipping GPU core was saying. It was mental hot. So 500 RPM, nah, don't bother. 1000 RPM, 61 degrees, did fairly good. I then notched it up another 200 RPM because it was just to see, and it dropped another 4 degrees down to 57. At that point, just to let you know as well, with the air coming out of the radiator, at 1200 RPM was still 40 degrees. But the air coming out of the radiator was 40 degrees. What you need to keep in mind is that even though we're running more than double the fan speeds, it did mean that the GPU core temperature was actually significantly lower. We're looking at like 20 odd degrees, almost 30 degrees difference. So it does go to show you that if you can get the heat out of the radiator, then that drops, and it's just the speed at which the heat is passing out. So it was only a 5 degree difference in the air temps, but it was almost a 30 degree difference in the actual GPU core temps. So there we go. Moving up to 2500 RPM, which is the max speed of the fan, it was 48 degrees. So significantly cooler, because obviously you've got an absolute torrent of air blowing over the radiator. But then weirdly, the air coming out of the radiator was only 39 degrees. And I've got all these in here, but I couldn't be bothered to take the graphs apart and put secondary graphs and all stuff like that. And it's easier for me to just tell you. Anyway, so I would say around 1200 RPM is probably the sweet spot for the fans, but you obviously don't need it to be running at 1200 all the time. You can have it back off to 500 RPM on your desktop and stuff like that, 450 RPM, it doesn't really need to do it. But you get any amount of load going into the graphics card or anything like that, about 1200, 1250 RPM, and it's still very, very quiet, but you get decent temps. Now, the other thing to remember with the NVIDIA cards is you've got GPU Boost 3. And even though this card comes with 1700 megahertz boost out of the box, it doesn't actually stay there. So in the GPU Z that you can see, yes, you've got the stock clock, you've got the boost clock, but it boosts even more than that. This is why manual overclocking, there isn't a great deal of it. All you're doing is fine tuning with the overclocks and these cards. So if we were to go into show you the graph for the speeds, I've then done you a 500 RPM, a 1000 RPM, 2500 RPM and 1200 RPM graphs. So with the graphs, essentially 2500 RPM, you will get roughly the best result. Now the maximum that you can see was just in front on the 1200 RPM. I don't know exactly why we got a. It's not a great deal of difference. There's 1100 megahertz. I ran it a few times. It did seem to keep going back to that, and at 1200 RPM, it seemed to still stay just below. Now I don't know why. My only rough, plausible example, considering, like I said, I did this a few times to check up on it, and the 2500 RPM was always just like a few megahertz behind, and I couldn't work it out. So maybe for some random reason, the amount of power that the fan pulls, maybe that causes it to not go as much. Don't know why, I haven't got a clue, but it was consistent, so it's a weird one. So yet again, I would say that the 1200, 1250 RPM sort of stuff is going to be about the peak. But then when you go down to 1000 RPM and 500 RPM, they do back off. So this is quite an interesting one. And the one to pay more attention to is the red bar, which is the average, because the average is the one, that's where your difference in the games is going to be. It's all right having a 3-second spike to, I don't know, do you know what I mean? A 3-second spike to 1950 RPM, 1950 megahertz. But if it's more than often than not running at 1800 megahertz, but you've got another card which is spiking to 1925, but it's always running at 1900, the one that's got the higher, more consistent clock over a greater period of time is going to be the faster card. So with this, the one thing that we can say is with the average, the 2500 RPM did do better, but it had a lower peak. So this is the other point that I was trying to make to you about before, that it's a bit weird, but the average kind of made up for it. So and it was a 22 megahertz difference between the average on a 1250 to the 1200. But then you've also got to think to yourself, you know, noise in your ears and all that sort of stuff. So yet again, I would say probably the 1250 RPM in that respect was the better one. And then I'll chuck you up some games just quickly. People have been asking about games, but I do need to tell you that you can go to the OC3D website so that you can go and see all of the other graphs and you can go and see all of the other tests, because it's a multi-page review and I do results. These ones we've only been doing them at 4K and 1440, but on the lower cards we do them at 1080p as well. Sometimes we cut the 1440 off. It depends on the actual size of the gonads for the actual cards itself. But anyway, Ghost Recon Wildlands and DSX. Best way I can put it is with Ghost Recon Wildlands, you've only got the fully fledged ROG Poseidon on the top, and that's got, you know, that had dedicated water and all of that sort of stuff going on. And then DSX, again, you've only got the Poseidon above it. Although with Ghost Recon Wildlands, we'd have an SLI above that. Now, so lots more tests on the website. That is the most important thing for us to be able to kind of drive home. People are going to be wondering about the difference between this and the Poseidon. Now the Poseidon, it has dedicated water and air. If you're running it on water, then the fans go off. This is a clean way of doing things though, because it's an enclosed loop. The Poseidon, if you want to use water, it's dedicated water. You need a pump and a reservoir and fans, and you have to go and buy all that stuff. This is sealed, it's fit and forget, it's quite easy to put in your cases. But one of the things I was trying to get to when I was talking to you about fan speeds and all that sort of stuff earlier, and temperatures coming out of the radiator as well. The thing that we need to remember with this is that it's a 1080 Ti. There's a lot more cores going on inside this. There's a lot more to cool. So this is one of the few of these that I've had that I've actually been like, oh my God, this thing gets really warm. And you have to have that fan, like I said, over 1000 RPM to be able to keep it, I would consider, usable for long gaming sessions, especially if you're in a warm room or in a loft or something like that, or in a warm country. So this is one of the few that I would say I would mount in the back of my case, exhausting out, or depending on the config of your case, and depending whether you've got a 240 radiator in the roof or room in the roof for a mount, you could even mount this in the roof so it's exhausting all the air out. Whatever I would say is, I would say that it's best to have the radiator making sure that the air is going out. Don't worry about sucking cold air in, because it's just going to dump all the air in, hot air in your case. This is one of the few times where I am going to be telling you, get it mounted in your case, get the hot air out of it. Normally, even I would have this mounted in the front, but if I was to put this in my own case, it would be in the back, like that, with the fan visible as the exhaust fan. Long term, the only pain in the bottom with that's going to be is you are going to have to pop the screws off the back every now and then, and make sure you clean off the radiator, get a hoover on it, get the turbo blowers and stuff on it to keep the dust free. So that's the only other thing that I would say about that, you know, long term. Now it is, I'm not going to say a basic looking car, but it's not the prettiest shroud in the world. But unless you're putting it vertical, which is going to change things drastically, then really the only thing you've got to worry about is the back plate. If black isn't for you, the back plate comes off really easily. You can take that off, you can smash some paint over it real quick. It's the same with the shroud as well. If you don't like the black shroud, you can weekend project it. It's a TTL thing now. You can weekend project it. You can make it whatever colour that you want. Just remember that with the shroud on the front of the card where the fans are, plastic primer. The shroud on the back of the card, it's aluminium. What I personally do with that is I use a separate etch primer, then a normal primer over the top of the etch, then your colour, and if you want to put clear on it, you can do, but I wouldn't worry about clear too much in an environment like this where it's going to be warm. Anyway, so performance was actually really good. So we're going to give it the performance award. The only kind of caveat of things that make it not the simplest thing in the world to do, and end users are going to have to be enthusiasts and pay attention, is the fan header going onto your motherboard. If you spend some time with it and you tune it properly, it will be a cool, calm powerhouse, which is going to give you all of the FPS that you could possibly want from a 1080 Ti, but keep it quiet. And you're going to get ridiculously good temps as well. It's not quite up to dedicated water temps, but you know, what was the temps that we got when we were on 1200 RPM? I mean, you're looking at below 60 degrees for a 1080 Ti being absolutely ravaged by Unigen, which most big fat air coolers with the fans whizzing away would have been looking at over 70 degrees. So it really does do the job. You just have to be quite careful with it. So that's why I decided to give it the OC3D Performance Award. I can actually see myself popping the plastic off of this and painting the shroud white and painting the backplate white, and that would actually fit really well within my own personal Orca 2 stroke interim system, to the point where I've even been looking at, can I customise the radiator and the AIO and all kinds of stuff. I don't think Corsair are going to let me keep it so that I can take it apart even more though, but I'd certainly like to. Anyway, so I apologise for there being a lot of information. It's just the way I do things. I can't just go to, oh yeah, it gets such and such FPS in this game and then give you no other details available. I mean, let's face it, when some other people do, it's a Corsair 1080 Ti versus a strict 1080 Ti. You got a little bit more than that in that one graph, and yet that is actually probably 2/3 of the data that I've got for that. So it's all a bit nuts. So hopefully you enjoyed the bombard. You can see that we always try to keep things fair, and I'm sorry that it wasn't in some, you know, swanky, you know, flashy rig with loads of lights going on around the outside and like those pan things and all that kind of stuff. You come to me, you come for raw. That's what she said. Anyway, this is Tiny Tom Logan with a cracking little hydro hybrid. Yeah, we're going to end up with me going on a random one here, so we do need to move on. Performance winner, smile on my face, I'd love one. Ding!